right. Good morning, beautiful students. It is Mrs. Milligan once again, screencasting from home. I wanted to give you a little bit of a review of Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet before we move on to Act 2, pointing out some of the different elements of a drama, definitely poetry elements, and of course, narrative. As you've already actively read this and submitted it, this is just to add to what it is that you've already annotated as you went through and hopefully clarify any issues you may have had with understanding what I'm looking for when I asked to annotate. So here you'll notice that in the beginning of Act 1, you have a summary. And this is obviously not part of the Shakespearean play, but it's just to help you to review the actual, or to know the plot before you actually get into the difficult language that oftentimes students find when they begin reading. We've got some stage directions here, which again are not a part of Shakespeare's actual wording, but like all dramas, you have to have a stage that sets the scene. Now you'll notice that this is called Act 1, and ACT stands for action. And literally when you're looking at the plot pyramid of a Shakespearean play, his plays are always written in 5 acts. And so he very quickly can outline what it is that he's going to do in each act of his play. Notice how Act 1 really lines up with the exposition of a narrative. So here we're introduced to the main characters, the main conflict, and from there we will begin the rising action. So the stage directions let you know that we have 2 servants of the household of Capulet, Juliet's family, coming onto the scene. And we know that the scene is set in a public square in Verona. So imagine it as the quad in the middle of school. You've got 2 friends that are walking along, basically talking smack about the Montague family, in which they believe they have been insulted by. As they're talking, Abram and Balthazar, as we know by the stage directions, enter onto the scene, and the 2 Capulet servants, Samson and Gregory, decide that they're going to insult Abram and Balthazar. Now here, when Samson decides to bite his thumb, what he's doing is basically equivalent to someone flipping you off today. A very rude gesture that everyone would agree is not something that you want to take or receive kindly. And here, Samson and Gregory basically start the quarrel, but they don't want to throw the first punch. And so they say, "No, I didn't bite my thumb at you, sir, but I'm biting my thumb." So basically, I'm walking around with my middle finger out, not meant towards you, just walking around with it. And obviously, Abram knows that they're trying to start a quarrel. And in the middle of the quarrel, Benvolio, notice, nephew of Montague and first cousin of Romeo, is also a very good friend to Romeo, comes in. And when that happens, the fight really ensues. Now notice how the stage direction just says they fight, but you have to remember that they're using swords in hand-to-hand combat, so it's very close and very bloody. So the fight goes on for a while, and Benvolio tries to part them. He even beats down their swords with his sword, and he tells them, "You know not what you do." In the middle of him trying to make peace in the family, the hot-headed nephew and first cousin of Juliet, notice the foil here between Benvolio and Tybalt, comes in, and he says, "You have your sword out. Turn to me and look upon your death." Or basically, if you're going to basically tell these people to stop fighting when you have your sword pulled, then that's not a fair fight. Benvolio tries to keep the peace, but it doesn't actually happen. Because of this, they fight again, right? Notice Tybalt's words of full of hate, right? And calls him a coward, the last insult. Now, in the middle of this brawl, and again, you got to remember there's at least 6 people here brawling with swords, enter several, both houses, and they join the fight. And then citizens and even peace officers come in with their clubs. So it's literally a full-on brawl. Because of this brawl, right, the entire town, if you notice by what they say, down with both families. They are not happy with how things are in their city of Verona. Capulet and Lady Capulet basically come onto the scene, and Lady Capulet tells her, basically, or tells him, you're not going to fight. But Montague comes in and he tries to fight too. Okay. With all of this going on, the ruler of Verona, Prince Escalus, comes in with attendants, and he has a large monologue. And in this monologue, he's basically telling the families that you need to stop, right? Or basically, you're going to be tortured. Then he goes into an explanation as to why, once he has all of their attention. 3 civil brawls. There's already been 3 fights. And they're bred from an airy word, or basically gossip, or what some people would like to call trash talk. And the citizens are very upset. People who have been basically in their retirement now, and were peaceful, are now turning into the same thing that you're spewing, which is hate. And he tells them, and this is pretty key at the end, if ever it happens again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. Now we know, once something's mentioned in a story or in a play, especially a Shakespearean play, that is probably going to play out somewhere towards the end. Tells everyone to leave, and everyone leaves except for Romeo's parents and his cousin. Now, we learn that Romeo was not there because Benvolio is someone who gives a good play-by-play. He's very straightforward and honest about what happens. And Lady Montague asks, where was Romeo? And we learn that Romeo was not there. Why? Because an hour before the sun came up, right, Benvolio was walking in a grove of sycamore, or basically a forest of trees, and he saw Romeo. He went towards him, but because Romeo saw him, he ran away. And so because Benvolio was basically dealing with his own stuff, he decided not to go after Romeo, and he fled from him. And we learn from Romeo's dad that many a morning he's been there in that grove or in that forest with tears augmenting the fresh morning's dew. So Romeo's been crying many a morning. So keep that in mind. It's been going on for a while. And then when in the farthest east, right, the shady curtains from Aurora's bed are pulled, or basically when the sun comes up, what does Romeo do? He steals home, makes himself private in his chamber, pens himself or locks himself in, locks fair daylight out, and makes an artificial night. Notice the reference of light versus dark. Romeo is choosing to put himself in the dark, and his father knows that black and portentous, or basically this cankerous hate or this cankerous depression, is going to only end up in a bad way if good counsel cannot come to him. Benvolio asks him, well, have you asked Romeo what's going on? And he says, well, myself and many other friends, right? But Romeo is to his own affections a counselor, or basically he won't talk to me. So notice this archetypal theme, right, of a father-son relationship, right? Romeo keeps himself so secret and so close that no one can get to him. Notice here this wonderful simile. So far from sounding and discovery as is the bud bit with the envious worm, ere he can spread his sweet leaves to the air or dedicate his beauty to the sun, could we but learn from whence he grows, his sorrows grow, we would willingly give cure as no. So he compares Romeo to a flower. And a flower is a universal symbol for beauty and life. And his dad's basically saying that his life is being cut short by all of this depression, and he's not being able to spread his sweet leaves to the air. He's not able to become everything he should be. In the midst of this conversation, we have another stage direction here that lets us know that Romeo comes on the scene with these other three. And because of that, Benvolio says, well, I'll know his grievance or be much denied. I will try. And Montague says, oh, I'd be so happy if his confession comes out. And so Romeo's parents take off and just leave Benvolio and Romeo. Now, I love this passage because I think it's a really good example of iambic pentameter. And it shows you how Shakespeare actually splits up his lines. There's a reason why Romeo's speech starts here. It's because Benvolio begins the first part of the line and Romeo actually finishes it. So together, these two lines actually are line 1, 2, this is line 153, and together these two lines are 154. And how do we know this? Well, let's look at the syllables. Good morrow, cousin, is the day so young. We've got a soft accented syllable followed by a loud syllable. Soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud. So we have 2 feet where one syllable is said softly and another said loudly. And we have all together 5 of these. And 5 times 2 equals 10 syllables per line. Hence the reason why Shakespeare splits it up. But Shakespeare also writes in this way to really show the rhythm that these two have together. It really shows their bond, right, their connection, and that they have a banter. So Benvolio says, well, why are you sad? And he says, not having that, which having makes them short. And then all of a sudden, they go into informal language, not iambic pentameter, what we would call prose, everyday language. Out of her favor where I am in love. So we learn that Romeo is in love, and from the summary we know that the girl's name is Rosaline. And Rosaline won't give him the time of day. Because of that, he talks about how love is something that's sad. He uses a reference to Cupid, which they give you some extra information about that here. And then notice the dashes. In the midst of this conversation with Benvolio, he actually notices or observes that there's been a fray or a fight. And how could he not, I'm sure, that the town square is in shambles. And he says, well, tell me not, for I've heard it all. So he's aware of the actual fight between the families.